Welcome to the Bunny Chronicles.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm so happy that you're here. To our audience, thank you so much for your support. If you are not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. It's Bunny Chronicles Podcast. All of our socials are also Bunny Chronicles Podcast. Make sure you subscribe, like, and tune in because all of the audio format interviews, also long format videos, and they're awesome. Also, if you want unedited videos with no commercials or breaks, you can also support the show at patreon.com/the Bunny Chronicles podcast. Welcome to the show, Leland. We are going back into the 70s and early 80s, y'all. And I am so excited because I certainly know that for me, thinking about Playboy, that's kind of always the era I would go to. What was it like in the 70s? Because two things, and Karina and I agree on this, that some of the most epic, beautiful Playmates came out of that era, but it was also the 70s. It was the era of freedom and sexual promiscuity and party. It was a fun time. So it's going to be interesting to take a deep dive into this era and time. Let me introduce you to our guest. Leland is joining us, and he had a long career with Playboy that started in 1978. He was a Playboy Mansion butler on the night shift until 1982. Leland worked with Playboy up until the 2000s, around the Girls Next Door era. Wrote a lot of movies for Playboy, so we're going to get into that as well. It was the heyday, and this is a quote from Leland, and I think it really kind of sums up what we're going to be talking to. It was the era before AIDS, 1978 to 82, sexual freedom and promiscuity, and the era before cocaine began shattering lives. And that's a very big, true statement. Leland was very close with iconic playmates of that era and decade. Monique St. Pierre, who was Playmate of the Year 1979. We love Monique. Heidi Sorensen, who was Miss July 1981, Rain Michaels, and more. And Leland was also there during the time of some pretty prolific relationships that Hef had early on before he ever got married. Shannon Tweed, Carrie Lee, Sandra Theodore. And it was also the time of Dorothy Stratton's death. Or 80. Definitely going to talk about that. That was a pivotal time in the history of Playboy. And at some point, I do want to do a show that's dedicated to Dorothy. I'm happy that we're going to be able to talk about that today. In the early 90s, Leland started working as a contributing writer for Playboy Entertainment, writing Skinamax style movies. We'll get into that as well. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. And let's get into the conversation.
Okay. Where would you like to begin?
Well, I want to begin at the beginning with you, and how you. Let's go way back to when you first heard the word Playboy and saw Playboy magazine and found out about the mansion and your whole journey of how you ended up in the Playboy family.
My first memory of Playboy was finding a Playboy magazine that somebody had left behind a gas station or something. And I was 6 or 7, something like that, or 10 maybe. I brought it home and I hid it under the fort out in the backyard. And I would go out there every so often and sneak out there and look at those pages and dive into that world. And I don't remember her name, but everyone remembers her first Playmate, their first glimpse of an adult human naked female. And you know, that sort of started it for me. When I was a young man, a college age, like most young men at that time, I was fascinated with Playboy. It was mid 80s, and most young men went through a Playboy phase. And as soon as I was old enough, I got a subscription, and that made me feel like a man more than maybe smoking cigarettes or even getting laid would have. And in January 1975, this issue.
Cool. I love that cover. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah. In this issue, they had an article, a pictorial about the Playboy Mansion. You can see that. Big, very detailed article describing the mansion and all these pictures of movie stars and celebrities and Hefner himself and the castle-like structure of the house and the zoo and the grotto and the forest and There were staged pictures of naked girls running all over the place. And I bought into bought into the mythology of it. And I became fascinated by it. I was living in Oregon and I moved to LA to try to get into the film business. And when I moved to LA, I went looking for the Playboy Mansion based on clues in the article. I knew it was 2 blocks off of Sunset. I knew it bordered the LA Country Club. So I'd drive up to Holmby Hills and drive around trying to find the place. And I eventually found what I was pretty sure was the mansion. You know, they had high walls, but over the walls and past the trees, I could see the crenellated walls of what I was sure was the mansion. And it became part of my personal legend, kind of. I told everyone, and I used to bring friends, I can show you where the Playboy Mansion is. It was before the internet, so most people didn't have a way to learn things like where the mansion was. And I was working at a gas station at the time down in Torrance. I was writing screenplays. I'd bring my typewriter to work every day and sit in the gas station office typing scripts, you know, between customers. And one day I was showing somebody the Playboy Mansion, and a kid about my age walked up to the back gate, waved at the security camera and said, "Hey, Dave, Butler." And the gates opened up and he walked up the driveway. And my jaw hit the ground because I hadn't been clever enough to imagine there was such a thing as working at the Playboy Mansion. And I thought, how the hell do you get that job? Is it like a national lottery, you know, a worldwide search for the cool guys, you know? Who gets that job? And by the strangest stroke, not long after that, one of the other guys who works in the gas station came in one day and said, "Hey, my girlfriend, a regular at our restaurant, is a bartender at the Playboy Mansion." I said, "You got to get me a number." I just finished bartending school because I was turning 21 and I wanted to do something other than pump gas. And I got the name of the house manager, John Maldonado, and I called and I told him all these lies about how I had all kinds of experience as a bartender. And he brought me up for an interview, and I drove up there and actually got to walk through the back gate and go to the house office and talk to him. And my memory about, and you know, I remember the smell of and you remember back then in the spectacle, beautifully groomed. It was like Disneyland, you know, it's just another world. But one of my memories of that meeting is going into his, you know, little house office, which looked like a restaurant manager's office. And there was a broken lamp on his desk. For some reason, it made it seem more real and accessible to me. I thought, lamps can break at the Playboy Mansion. You know, there's something about that made it like, okay, this isn't a complete fantasy. So when next time they needed extra help for a big party, they called me, and it was a fundraiser for Jerry Brown, I think. And I went up there that afternoon and I worked behind the bar out in the backyard. So I saw a couple of celebrities and 1 or 2 playmates, Debbie Boostrom actually, and she said hi to me at the bar, and my life was complete. You know, a playmate said hi to me. And at the end of I couldn't go explore anywhere. I was dying. I wanted to go see the grotto. I wanted to go to the forest. I wanted to go to the zoo. I wanted to go inside the house. I couldn't do any of that. But at the end of my shift, they asked if I wanted to work again. And I said, sure. And they needed somebody to work, I think, Friday and Saturday nights. And so I was quickly put on working 2 nights a week. For a while, I pumped gas all week, and then Friday night, I'd run up to the mansion and work there all weekend and then come back and pump gas. That only lasted for a few weeks until they needed somebody to work full-time on the night shift. So in short order, I found myself working full-time on the night shift as a butler.
I wanted to ask you, what kind of scripts were you writing? And is that what you wanted to do?
Since I was 12 years old. I was writing like romantic mysteries and stuff, you know, just the stupid stuff that people do when they're first.
Did you ever get any of those films made? And did Playboy, were you thinking, hey, getting into the Playboy Mansion, this might help facilitate this classic Hollywood story with, you know, you're writing scripts, you want to be they're all bartenders. Every actor and screenwriter in Hollywood is a bartender. It's like your whole beginning is so fun.
Yeah, well, I got to meet people like Peter Bogdanovich and Buck Henry and Richard Brooks and Robert Towne, and I was too much of a nerd and didn't have enough confidence to approach any of these people, and I didn't have confidence in my writing because I was just starting out. So I didn't really see it necessarily as a path, or I wasn't clever enough to promote myself as a writer. Although I have a script that I was writing at the time that has on the autograph by James Caan. Leland, best wishes with this, James Caan.
I just have to say, because you just reminded me, that was my first celebrity I met at the mansion. I was 18 when I went up there. It was right after Misery came out. Yeah, and he was talking to me at the bar, and I was like, oh my God.
I don't think a lot of people realize how spectacular and special it is to have this kind of, you know, even brushing shoulders with and being part of the underbelly, in a sense, of Playboy. So thank you.
Well, one night my job was Peter Bogdanovich brought up some young woman and wanted to show her a bunch of movies. So We had to put the 16 millimeter projectors on the grand piano in the living room and roll down the screen. And as butlers, we had to learn how to change out the projectors and show movies. And he showed this young woman 4 or 5 movies. So I sat there and I watched Citizen Kane and Touch of Evil and I forget, like 5 movies. And all I had to do was just sit there and watch movies. I watched Peter Bogdanovich sitting down in front of me trying to tell this young woman how great these movies were. And I don't think she had the slightest interest in, classic cinema.
Meanwhile, she's getting a master class in film.
Yeah, I wish I wanted to move down, sit next to him and talk to him about it. Well, my thought at the time was, wow, I'm getting paid to just sit here and watch movies. And because I couldn't leave, I would call the butler's pantry and have the other butler bring me dinner when it was dinner time. Because I was there for 5 hours.
Would you really, Leland? That's awesome.
But the most valuable thing was that I got to meet Robert Towne, who was a legendary screenwriter and then well regarded as the best screenwriter in LA and my personal hero. And he was a regular at the mansion, so I kind of got to know him. And when I left the mansion, I went to work for him as his personal assistant for a while. So that was kind of fortuitous. But anyway, I worked up there for 5 years. So for the next 5 years, my life was going to the Playboy Mansion. In a lot of ways, it was detrimental to my career because I wasn't trying so hard anymore. It was easy to feel like I'd already arrived because I got to go to the Playboy Mansion every night and hang out with all these famous people and live a pretty good lifestyle. So if I hadn't have done that, I probably would have worked a little bit harder in my career. But hey, what are you going to do? You're here at the Playboy Mansion. You're having fun.
Classic film. I mean, from beginning to end, from your dirty fingers pumping gas, typing on I see it all. So I hope you wrote this and I hope that it's going to be made into a feature film and that I get a role in it.
Yeah, the film is Karina's arena, Leland. So she's always excited when we can talk about. She's an actress, comedian.
So I love that. And I love that about you and that you got to be around some real legends,
Yeah. Well, I just finished a script about that experience, so stay tuned for that. I'm going to show you guys some pictures, okay?
Okay. Yeah. Please,
I think I might have sent some of these to you. That's me serving Hef. There's Sandra.
Yeah, I got that one. Yeah.
And that's me in the pantry. And after I was there for a while, I would come into the pantry and I'd turn off the overhead fluorescence and put on this nice, soft, indirect rose-colored lighting to create a nice, moody little clubhouse.
Yeah, I was wondering about that, Leland. I was like, I don't remember it being like that in the pantry. Okay, so you'd set it up.
For me, yeah.
He's like, it was for me.
We would have gotten in trouble with Leland. I have my butler. Yeah. We all have our butler stories.
Well, yeah, the mansion became a very popular hangout. And it wasn't supposed to be, but girls, a lot of the guests would come hang out with us, but especially a lot of the girls, because we were the young, cool butlers. We weren't
not supposed to fraternize with the guests.
Well, I have a memo here.
You do? You have to send that. And it's from Hef?
No, it's from the House office. It says, recent events have brought to light the fact that the situation of guests hanging out in the pantry area and fraternizing with the butlers has gotten totally out of control. And then new rule for how
You are not the first one to say that. Yes, look at
Is that
it's Monique?
Oh, I love her. I love Monique. Monique was my kind of mentor. When I was a baby, we were all babies, but I remember she really walked me through so much because she was doing makeup.
Yeah. Well, she's a very, very sharp cookie and very sexually evolved. I was in awe of her because she slept around a lot and was totally unabashed about it. And it made it seem very cool to be a woman who had sex with a lot of people. And I just thought, wow, I
didn't even know that about her.
Yeah, she's living in the future or something. Yeah, she was very cool.
She's living in the future. Who is that in the picture with you?
That's Victoria Cook and Kim Mallon.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Out in the guest house.
Victoria Cook, she lives in Santa Fe. She's a client of my dad's. And I love that picture of you in Belushi. Yeah. We have to talk about that because I remember when we interviewed Mark Hopkins, another butler, and
he was my buddy. Mark and I are best friends.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what he talked to, that you guys were super tight. But he brought up, and we did the interview with Kathy St. George, and he brought up that, I don't know if you were there, I assume that you were, but that Belushi and Aykroyd would just show up to the mansion. And even if Hep was like upstairs asleep or doing whatever, they would come in and hang out. And Mark's like, I'm literally watching them firsthand, like perform for me, smoking a joint. And I'm like, no way.
Yeah. They felt more comfortable with us than with Hef and his buddies. They came up, Belushi brought up the members of the punk band Fear one night. So Lee Ving and Durf Scratch were up there. completely out of their element, and sort of like kids, even though they were these tough punk musicians, they were like kids in a candy store, like, afraid to touch anything and shy around the playmates and stuff. It was pretty interesting. Yeah.
Love it. I was
Yeah.
a punk playmate, so I get it.
Robin Williams. We had a good time. We got to watch Robin
Yes.
Williams do his impromptu performances.
Yes, that's one because I was just listening to a podcast that you were interviewed, and that was one of the stories that really tickled me. I'm like, oh my gosh, you've got your own private show from Robin.
Yeah, Mark and I were locked in the library bathroom, fueling Robin Williams as he did I don't know if you've been in the library bathroom. It's not much bigger than the phone booth.
Yeah.
So the three of us were in there for half an hour laughing our asses off as Robin Williams basically did a routine for the two of us. It was pretty
They paid it for cocaine.
Well, yeah. I think there was cocaine.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
That is wild.
I am going to ask you this. So just having been part of that for the 4 years that you were there, and it was five, which is a long time of the grand
And
years.
to do the night shift.
The grand years of butlers and butlers debauchery and cocaine. I think that it was there were a lot of pivotal things that you saw that really switched the whole dynamic at the mansion, because it was almost like the party was over because, of course you found out the effects of certain things, and it's all fun and games till,
Yeah. Yeah. Playboy started going downhill and losing a bunch of money. They lost their casinos. That was happening. Playboy TV started happening, and that was a pretty big failure at first blush. Cocaine became more rampant. You'd go to a big party, there'd be 200 guys and 300 girls, and that at least 180 of those guys had a vial in their pocket. That was just the way life was conducted back then.
Hef was so against cocaine and all those things. It became so shunned, especially when I became a playmate. When I went to the mansion, he was married to Kimberly. It was a family house. And I'm sure it would have been fun to be a fly on the wall then, but it's fun to hear it because it changed. It definitely changed.
Oh, yeah, I know. I definitely. Years later, when I came up to do the Playmate of the Year luncheons, it was very, very different. The house by then had gotten pretty long in the tooth and was pretty ragged. They were shooting the Girls Next Door show, so it was set up almost as a permanent studio. Lights permanently clamped to the balconies in the Great Hall and cables running around. And it had nowhere near the same intimacy and exclusivity that it did, in my era. Mm. Part of the thing about being there in the 70s and the 80s, so people didn't have cell phones. So nobody had cameras on them. There aren't a lot of photographs. So you could go up there and be assured of your privacy. There wasn't anyone taking pictures, selfies, and there wasn't a TMZ or any kind of salacious gossip mill dedicated to, exposing those secrets. It really felt exclusive. You felt like you were part of an extremely exclusive club, being able to come to the Playboy Mansion. As you guys know, Playboy feels like a family for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
But as a butler too, and later as a writer, I always felt that feeling of we're a family in a way, because so many people had a provincial view of Playboy. They thought it was, when I was writing those movies, my friends and acquaintances would joke, "Oh, you still writing that porn?" And it wasn't porn. It was very, very softcore. It was SAG actors. It was movies that appeared on Cinemax and stuff. But I often said that Playboy was like the Disney of porn, if you could call it that. It was the most high-class, respectable version of female nudity that existed on the planet. So I think because so many people had the wrong view of it, those of us who really knew how corporate it was, for one thing, how nice most of the people were, the fact that there weren't orgies and tureens of cocaine on the tables of the mansion and stuff, you couldn't really convince people of that stuff, but you knew. So you were in the know, and that
I get into that argument with people all the time, not all the time, but now, especially doing the Bunny Chronicles. It's, I have a friend of mine.
What is that?
Forth about him calling Playboy porn. He's like, no, it's pornography. I'm like, I did.
That's just some monopoly money there.
That's cool. There was a Playboy Monopoly game?
Yeah, it's got the Chicago Mansion and the Playboy LA Mansion. No, this is money that was specially made for Hefner's Monopoly. He played Monopoly 3 nights a week, and they played with money that they printed for it. So
That's so cool. That's
Yeah.
so neat. I wanted to touch on that, Leland, what you just said about it being a big corporate entity, and it was actually one of the more conservative environments that you would work in, because I just had an interview with Eric Middleman and Farrell Hirsch, who were Playboy TV, Playboy Radio, and your name came up. Eric, he spoke to that, and particularly, it's a very funny story. Our audience listened to the show with Playboy Radio. So there was it was like a holiday party. And of course, they have HR department, and they were any sort of like sexual advances like that didn't fly within the corporate entity. It just didn't, right? So they were having a Christmas party, and Hef came, and as we all know, Hef always would do open mouth kiss. That's just what he did to everybody, right? And
Not
so he
me.
comes into the party. And Eric Middleman is standing there with the HR lady. There was a group of strippers that were from the Playboy radio night calls that were there, and they all wanted to meet Hef. And of course, Hef was going to go give him a smooch and whatever. And then Eric was like, looked over the HR and was like, are we going to have a problem with this? And the lady at the HR, she goes, nah, I just think we need to look the other way on this one. And I was like, oh, that's so funny. It's Hef.
There was a great deal of looking the other way at the Playboy Mansion. Was that the Playboy Mansion matchbook?
You have so much memorabilia because of the Facebook page as well, huh? That you
Look
run.
at that. That's a genuine Playboy bunny tail.
No way. Oh, that's so
you have a
cool.
story with that.
The reason I have this is that one year the Playboy Bunnies from the LA Club were playing the LA Rams cheerleaders in a charity softball game in Century City. And they enlisted me and several of the other butlers to be cheerleaders for them. So we wore little shorts and Playboy shirts, and we had bunny tails, and we stood on up near the dugout. We were so stoned. I don't think we ever did any kind of cheers or anything, but we were there to be the sex.
That's so funny. And Karina even said, looking at your old pictures, she was like, oh, he was one of the cuties, one of the cute butlers. Cause there was like the butlers in security that had like game, right? That like, they were our buddies. And I was like, oh yeah, him and Mark Hopkins were like, yeah, they were having a ball.
Well, yeah, yes and no. Mark did very well for himself, and he was kind of a ladies' man. I grew up kind of a nerd, and that's who you think you are inside is just who you think you are. And I was not a player. So I did date a couple of playmates, but I wasn't trying to get laid. I'm not that kind of guy anyway. I like sex that has some emotion and meaning to it.
I find that part of Playboy something that I think is special, because I never felt like it was creepy. People would say, like, and I think the people that have had around him or hired, that was one of the things that was made most of them special anyway, because I think that's really, that makes you have character, that you weren't a sleaze.
It got me close with a lot of girls because they knew I wasn't on the prowl, and I'm still close with a lot of them. I probably turned down a lot just because I was convinced that they were kidding if any girls came on to me. I thought, oh, they're just teasing. I didn't think I was cute or, playmate worthy necessarily. But I always found it curious that Hef had a staff of young men on the Butler staff. I always thought that was weird. It was almost like he was impish about it. Well, let's put these guys here and see what happens, because we were ostensibly not supposed to fraternize with the girls. But of course, especially at late night, that's fucking all we did,
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what there was to do. And
for decades and decades, that's what all the butlers did at night. Like, we'd go hang out with them.
A lot of the butlers were gay, not for any reason other than one guy gets a job and he gets his friend a job and they get their friend a job. The first gay people I ever knew were Playboy butlers. And growing up in a small town in Oregon, I thought gays were weirdos and freaks, but that was one of the coming of age aspects of it for me, is getting to know gay guys and realizing actually they're pretty cool and fun.
Was that Hef's pipe?
Pipes?
No way.
Yeah, it's one of Hef's pipes.
Oh my gosh, that's so neat, Leland.
Did he give that to you?
No, Hef never gave me anything except maybe a warning. No.
Except maybe a warning. That's so good. How old were you, Leland, when you started working up there?
I just turned 21 when I started.
Okay. So I want to back up and go into the relationships with Shannon Tweed, Carrie Lee, and Sandra Theodore, because these were epic periods in Hef's life, and they were really profound relationships. And these women all meant a lot to him. And it was very sad then to see Sandra Theodore come on The Dark Secrets of Playboy and change her whole tune. But how many years? So was Shannon Tweed first, and then Carrie Lee, and then Sandra, right?
No. When I started there, it was Sandra. Sandra came aboard I don't know, like 75, 76, something like that. She was only
Okay.
19 at the time. But she was fun. I really enjoyed Sandra. She was a real butt of the Butlers. And I was close to all those girls because Hefner's girlfriend du jour needed a confidant at the back stairs, So I would do secret things for them or keep secrets for them and deliver things that they didn't want Hef to know about. But Sandra was very unfull of herself and very friendly and garrulous, and I enjoyed her. I felt very close to her. I don't recognize the Sandra that we see now. Anyway, so it was strange watching Hef juggle Sandra and Heather Waite because Sandra would be sent off the property down the back gate just as Heather was coming up the front gate. I'm still close with Heather, by the way, but I always thought it was remarkable that Hefner was able to have two girlfriends at a time, and the girls were at least initially okay with it. But then he started seeing, because of Heather, Sandra got her own apartment in Westwood, and she was spending more and more
When
time.
she was living with Kathy St. George, they actually lived together. Kathy and Sandra had an apartment together. And so
Okay,
Kathy
yeah.
brought up, she goes, there's no way that any of that went down because I know where Sandra got her drugs from because we lived together. And I was like, oh.
I'm going to ask you what your takeaway was, because I think a lot of the things, that maybe if have had any regrets, but I think maybe that was sort of one of the things that was, if you could ever even say he had a demise, but was jilted women, because that's kind of a hard game to play. And he was so lovable and such an incredible human being, really, aside from, there's so many women that loved him and wanted just him. They wanted that monogamy, and he just wasn't going to be. He was a playboy. I mean, he was very, open about that, but I know that hurt a lot of people. Maybe that was the jiltedness of Sandra, why she went kind of nuts,
I don't know, because for years afterward, Sandra still came up to the mansion after she left, and she got married there, I believe, and she had her bachelor party there, and she borrowed money from Hef on several occasions. Yeah, became a friend of the family. I don't know. I don't want to speak to Sandra because she's going through whatever she needs to go through. She was a Sunday school teacher before she came to the mansion, so she may have some, vestigial primal senses of guilt about it all.
Yeah.
But she eventually got edged out. I don't remember exactly how they broke up, but they would get into fights. And then Shannon showed up, and when she started coming up, Shannon was a very alpha kind of female, and I think she saw the lay of the land and said, "I'm going to take this," in a way,
Yeah.
She was able to kind of engineer her way in there, and she had a very strong personality. She was beautiful and statuesque. I liked Sandra a lot. I liked Shannon a lot too, but she quickly took over Hef's girlfriend, and she quickly put a kibosh on the sexual shenanigans. She wasn't interested in doing threesomes, where Sandra was completely game for all of that stuff, and it was a party every night practically. So in a way,
that's actually an interesting point because I never really considered that, because after him and Kimberly broke up and then the multiple girlfriends, and I had always heard that he had relationships, and so I thought that they were monogamous, but it makes sense that even back in the 70s, he was like juggling.
They would fight, Shannon and Hef, because Shannon was a strong girl, and she started working on Playboy TV and I think on some other show, and she was gone a lot, and Hef didn't really like her having her own life, really.
Interesting. Okay.
I'll show you something else here. This here?
Yeah.
This is the pantry logbook. It's sat by the phone in the pantry, and every day there's a list of who's in what bedroom.
Yeah.
And then who comes on and off the property. Ray Manzella comes on at noon, and Max Sweat goes off at 11:30, whatever. John Dante wants some more of this particular kind of wine, or Hef is leaving at 3 and we need a limo, or Luann Fernald will be arriving and going in guest house 4. So I found that in the basement years after. This is 1978, 79.
That's awesome.
And I thought, that's a good thing to have. Sort of.
Yeah.
There was a whole library of these, and I just, because the reason I took this one is every night we would have to write. Hef would pre-order his dinner. He'd call and say what he wanted for dinner, and then later he would call and say, bring dinner up. And it was my job to write down his order. And I started getting really fancy about it. Like, there's
wow, how cool
writing,
is that?
writing his order, and You see some other examples. That's me putting his order up on a movie marquee.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it's
You
kind
know,
of a,
that's a good point that, okay, as our audience should know at this point, that Hef was an avid scrapbooker and kept everything you
yes,
can
yes.
possibly imagine. And so they had all the logs of the books. I mean, and I always wondered about that. Like, how did they know we were coming on? Like, da 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 da. So everything was always then conveyed to you guys in the logbooks, who to expect, what room they were in.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind of had to have control of all that kind of stuff. And like when someone came on the property, the pantry would get a call, so-and-so is on the property, and we'd write it in the logbook. And when they left, security would call and say, so-and-so is off the property, and we'd write it down in the logbook.
What was your first impression of Hef? Like when you met him, were you nervous? Were you in awe? Tell us about that.
Yes, your very first meeting.
Yeah.
Well, I wish I could tell you. It was I saw him at a distance at the charity luncheon that I worked at, and he just seemed like a larger than life character over there across the lawn. And so I never really developed much of an impression of him, except that I observed him, and he was a smart guy, obviously, very generous with his friends, and fun and funny, and very friendly, and just probably be a very good guy to know. But in the 5 years I worked for him, he never called me by my name once. At some
You're
point,
not
I
the
think,
first to say that,
yeah,
Leland.
at some point he must have figured it's not cool to get to know your servants, or maybe because there's so many of them, or there was
Your servants.
turnover. Yeah, well, that's what I was. And I served him dinner in bed every night. And all his girlfriends knew me very well. And Sandra would come down in the morning to see the latest drawing that I did in the book. And she told me she showed Hef, and, Hef feigned disinterest in it. Years later,
How dare the peasants? How dare the peasants have art?
years later,
Fraternizing, I said.
Really?
when I was writing movies for Playboy, they would have the company parties at the Playboy Mansion. So I actually got to go up to the mansion basically as a guest. And on one of those parties, I went up to Hef and said, "Well, Mr. Hefner, I'm Leland. I was one of your butlers for many years, and now I'm writing for Playboy." And he said, "Huh."
You did not help facilitate that. You just now. How did that happen? I thought maybe Hef noticed, your
Yeah,
conversation, and he opened that door. I didn't realize you.
No,
opened
not
it.
at all. Not at all.
Okay.
It was just a complete kind of coincidence. Years later, after the mansion, I was trying to get a job in the business, and MTV was prevalent at the time, was coming up, and there was a lot of companies springing up to make music videos. And I saw that as a ground floor opportunity. There was all these new young companies that I thought would be easier to get into than trying to get into one of the studios or one of the big production companies. So I found a list of companies that made music videos and sent a bullshit resume to them, and I got a job as a PA on a couple of video shoots. And after just doing a couple of those, one company that I was a PA for, the head of the company learned that I was a writer and read some of the stuff I wrote. And I quickly went from being a PA to writing stuff for them, which I did for a while. The company got big and moved to Nashville because they were starting to get big in country music videos. And I didn't want to do that. So I kind of lost that connection, but they were hired to make a home video for Playboy, erotic workout for lovers. And they shot it. And then they came to me, they asked me to write the voiceover for it, which I did. And then the company went away.
I want to know what a voiceover for lovers is all about. Wait, you just sketch this stuff out. Oh my God.
It's like, I don't remember now, but it was like couples yoga, here, hold your lover by the back as they bend over and stretch and blah, blah, blah.
This is brilliant.
But years later, somebody at Playboy contacted me and said, "We saw your name on this thing, and we need someone to write some stuff." So I ended up writing a bunch of self-help videos that Playboy was marketing through Sharper Image. How to make love with the same person forever, secrets of erotic massage, Dr. Ruth's 10 secrets for greater sexual pleasure. So I wrote a whole string of those, and this was before the internet. And so I'd get tasked to write one of these. I have to go out to the bookstore and just sit on the floor of the stack of books about sexual pleasure, whatever, and figure out all this stuff and then write this stuff. So that's how I got into writing for Playboy. And I did that for a while. And then they started making movies, and I really wanted to make movies. So I was able to get into the movie division and started writing movies for them. And I ended up being their kind of number one writer. I wrote or did page one rewrites of other scripts. I worked on 25 feature films for them over the years. So That was fun.
This would have been the early 90s, right? Because we also just had an interview with Andy Schreiber, who went on to, he started as a temp and went on to be vice president of Playboy home video department. And he was talking about when they were just starting this division. And I was like, well, you had access to the archives. There must have been so much stuff. And he was like, no, because all that they were doing was the Playmate videos, really. So 12 a year. And he was able to put together, like they had some old movies and whatever, and was able to put together enough of a catalog to then go distribute it into the foreign markets. Because it was at that point that different markets were opening up for the first time, like in Asia and Germany and whatnot. So early 90s. Yeah.
I guess so. I'm not that good at dates, but yeah, I know Germany was one of our big markets. We actually, it started out as Indigo Films and then became Mystique Films. And we had a studio in Marina del Rey, or Playa Vista, and we had our own soundstage and offices, and we would make 10 or 12 movies a year. So it was like a little mini studio just cranking out these movies. And it was fun because they were SAG actors. It was, they weren't porn. And we did mysteries and dramas and comedies and romantic comedies and stuff.
You had that budget to be able to go do something like that. And that's what was touched on as well. And also, this was interesting too. And I wonder if you found this or had the same experience as well. And again, going back to Eric and Farrell, that they were talking about the Playboy entertainment department and how there was a good chunk of people there that were like, this is so demeaning and the end of the road to be working at Playboy as a writer or producing this type of content.
Yeah.
And then they went to talk to, they had to build a wall between the Playboy Radio and Playboy Entertainment because Farrell didn't want the negativity spilling over onto his team. So
I heard that podcast and I don't have any experience of that.
Okay.
I worked with Richard Rossetti, Saul Wiesel. Dick Rossetti was the president of Playboy Entertainment Group. And it was, as everything else, it was very corporate, and we had a lot of fun and very mature and adult and very professional. And I suppose, myself included, we all wish we were working at MGM or, Paramount or something. But in fact, at the time, I kept thinking, I don't want to keep writing these fucking Playboy movies, especially because my friends would say, are you still writing that porn? And the actors weren't good. The actors that were willing to do this amount of nudity and simulated sex, you weren't getting the Timothy Chalamet's. So I would write these, what I thought were pretty good scripts. I really put a lot of effort into writing good screenplays. And then I'd go to the set. I always went to the set because free food and naked women. Just being involved in production is just undeniably glamorous anyway. But I would go to the set and watch these actors say my words, and they would just come out and just, fall dead. It was never really fun to watch them become good movies. But the fun part of it is that we'd do 10 or 12 movies a year, and you do a movie, you'd make the movie, you cast it, we'd have story meetings and then build sets and cast it and shoot it. And then we never had to worry about either reviews or box office, They came out and we went on to the next day. So it wasn't until after it was all over, we sort of looked back and realized, yeah, pretty good little thing going there.
Did you move on to do anything else with, writing and...
Well, they eventually quit making movies, and I did some other stuff for Playboy TV, and I ended up doing those Playmate of the Year luncheons several years running for a producer named Steve Silas. And that was kind of fun because it would start out by going to the Playboy studios on Broadway, I think in Santa Monica, where the Playmate of the Year would get made up for the luncheon. And we'd go there and I would interview her in the makeup chair as she was getting made up. And then and getting dressed. And then we would ride with her in the limo to the Playboy Mansion. I'd sit in the back of the limo next to the camera and interview her on the way to the Playboy Mansion. And we get to the mansion. And as a butler, I was used to going up the back gate. So now I was arriving in a limo coming up the front gate.
Yeah.
And it was kind of fun to come up to the mansion that way. And at the Playboy luncheon, there was invariably a lot of Playmates from the past there. So I'd see all these Playmates that I knew from back when I was a butler. Now I was a writer-producer guy. So it was kind of interesting.
Leland, was that an idea that you had, or did Playboy approach you about documenting the PMOY luncheon?
Wow.
No, I think Playboy TV was doing it. I don't know if it was Trachillis or who, but they were being done. And, if you get, reputation for being able to write well and write quick and be a good guy, you sort of get recommended. That's kind of what happens. Like, we're looking for a writer. Hey, talk to Leland. So. That's
It's
how that happened.
interesting. Karina, do you remember, I guess you would have known, but in 1993, do you remember them documenting your whole Playmate of the Year luncheon?
No, they did.
No. Okay.
Before.
It's 2020. You're like, we're going back to 1978 here, y'all. Like, we got a lot of dates to
I
remember.
swore I would never even go back to my Playboy days. It was something in the past, but it is such a fascinating world. It's Echo that I always say drug me into this kicking and screaming, and here I am representing. It's been so fun. It's like people like you that I just find it really are part. I hate for it to sound cultish because it isn't, but we're part of a very special family.
Well, without
It's
question.
there's nothing like Playboy. There just isn't. And I was never ashamed of it, but I am a Christian, and I had started studying the Bible after the fact, and because I had seen a lot of things that I think helped shape me to want to know, even discovering like deep into the scriptures and things. I know that sounds funny after having been at Playboy, but I like to ask this question, how you think it shaped you, or some of the life lessons you may have learned from being around Playboy. And we really do. We all have a camaraderie. I feel like some of the most fascinating people I've ever met, some of the most influential people I've ever met from all sides of the gamut. It's a very interesting,
Robust. Yeah.
very
Yeah.
robust, very eclectic, very, you could go on and on. I mean, I've met other Christians that have been part of the Playboy world, if you will, and it's just interesting.
Well, I don't know that it shaped me at all, really. I think, everything shapes me as a writer and as a thinking person. I'm always on the lookout for meeting and seeking patterns and trying to understand life and understand people. When I came to the mansion, I was a callow young boy and I was uncool. And my main drive at the time was trying to figure out how to be cool. I saw all these people and they seemed really cool. And I thought, what is cool? And I thought, well, it's cool to be really diffident and act like you don't care about. And then I'd see someone that exuded a lot of enthusiasm. I thought, well, that's cool to be really enthusiastic, or dress like this, or speak like that, or
That's
give
when you
these
were like
drugs.
21, so you were all, we're really all babies in our
It
early
was a very formative time, and I was really trying to, it was coming of age. I was trying to figure out how to be. At the same time, I saw a lot of misbehavior, kind of not in terms of harassment, although I saw very little of that. I didn't see a great deal of it. Almost everybody I know who was there at the time, all of the girls, I don't know of almost anybody other than Sandra who looks back with anything other than fondness on the whole experience.
Yeah.
But one of the things is, I was a writer and I was putting my writing on hold, and I became obsessed with the division I felt between me and the guests. They were the guests and they were the people that were cool enough to get invited to the Playboy Mansion, and they drove the Mercedes and they made movies, and I was the butler. And it got more upsetting, kind of aggravating, as I got to become closer friends to these people. I got to be really good sort of pals with James Caan and John Belushi and, people like that, and all the Playmates. And I'd sit around, when Hef wasn't around, I'd sit around with these people smoking a joint or shooting the shit or having fun talking to them. And then, there'd be a bunch of us just sort of hanging out. And then, oh, we need some drinks. Leland, you go get the drinks. And I remember, I'm the servant,
And that's hard because you, as an artist, as a creative, and as a writer, you really should be among your colleagues.
I eventually grew, the bloom went off of it. Mark got fired, so I didn't have my buddy to work with anymore. And I got stuck with a series of other butlers on the night shift who were gay or just boring or whatever, interested in the same things, interested in being a rascal the way I was. And it became a lot less fun. It became, I'd done everything and seen everything. After 3 or 4 years, it's like just more of the same. There was, and I realized that my career wasn't going anywhere. So I realized I couldn't stay there forever, but it was a golden nest that I needed to be kicked out of. I wasn't gonna, I couldn't conceive of voluntarily leaving a place like that. I mean, I got to go to the Playboy Mansion every night. So I got sloppier and sloppier in my work and in my transgressions, kind of in a self-sabotage way. And I was always buddies with the security guards. Most of them, they would turn their backs. wander through the house, and me and Mark would be sitting in the dining room smoking a joint with a couple of playmates, and they'd come in and quickly turn, like, I see nothing, because they liked us. But then there was a couple of security guards I didn't have much respect for. And at night, I'd go down to the wall and tweak the motion sensor wires just to fuck with them, do things like that just to mess with them. And so they started sort of to put a target on my back, and then they eventually busted me
That's
for something.
Funny,
Well,
Leland.
we want to hear your story about Belushi, your Belushi.
Well,
and are those things that when you say bad behavior, it's a personal idea of what you think is bad behavior, not that you would ever judge or anything, because that's how I am. I don't judge, but you make an observation and you say, okay, that's unhealthy. That's something that I just don't want to make those choices. Is it more like that?
No, just people being assholes,
Right.
People being assholes, being arrogant, largely being dismissive of me because I was a butler. People,
Give me a drink, servant.
yeah.
Drink,
And also to each other.
Service, I think, is a beautiful thing. There's something.
You got to serve somebody.
You're more thoughtful, but I get what you're saying, how frustrating that must have been, that you're sitting and having a good time, and you're one of the, you feel like you're all on
just the dismissive part. I can't stand that when people are dismissive.
Right. You're laughing. Go get me a drink.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There wasn't a great deal of that, to be honest. And most of the people, especially like Jimmy Kahn was great. He was like a really good guy. Tony Curtis, there's some people that were.
I don't think got enough recognition. I love Tony, and I feel so privileged to have met him. And he's one of the legendary. I don't think he ever got enough credit as an actor. I mean, Some Like It Hot.
Yeah.
He takes it back to me. He's totally being Katharine Hepburn when he's playing that character.
Sweet Smell of Success. He's brilliant in that. He's been the Defiant Ones.
Oh yeah, and the dark stuff that he did. That what's that movie that he played?
Left Key.
Yes. Oh my God.
A couple of things. Oh, Belushi, just to put a bow on that. One night he needed a ride to a recording studio in Santa Monica for whatever reason. He asked me to steal him a bottle of Chivas Regal. And I thought, if you asked Hef would probably give it to you, but I had to sneak a bottle out to the car for him. And I gave him a ride to the studio. And we had a couple of house cars, like these beat up old Chevy Vegas or something, Novas. And so we went down the back gate and started driving. And he was in a unhappy mood. And he was sad, complaining that he was having trouble with his wife, Judy. She was upset because he was sleeping around out in Hollywood. And he said, I know these girls are only sleeping with me because I'm famous. I know I'm ugly. And I said, no, John, you're a cute guy. Trying to make him feel better about himself. And we went down Comstock to Wilshire and turned right. And in the corner of Wilshire and Comstock, there's a hotel there now that used to be condos. And that's where the comedian Freddie Prinze committed suicide. And John Belushi pointed me out. He said, that's where Freddie Prinze killed himself. And I also remember him telling me about Doug Kinney. Doug Kinney was one of the editors of National Lampoon and one of the writers on National Lampoon's Animal House. He had died by either falling or jumping off a cliff in Hawaii. No one ever learned which one it was. And Belushi said, I told Doug not to move to L.A., man. I said, don't move to L.A., it'll kill you. Which is ironic because just a month or two later, Belushi was dead.
Whoa. Famous last words. That's insane.
But we had a really heartfelt talk on the drive, and Belushi was very egalitarian. If you could be the garbage man or the butler or the president, it's the same to him. You're just another human being. And it was very personable in that way. And so we had a great talk. And I allowed myself to think, hey, we're really hitting it off. We're really close here. It wasn't the first time I met him by any measure. But so we were just talking about women and the success and various things. And on the way to the studio, we got to the studio and I pulled up to the curb and said, well, good night. He said, no, not good night. Come on, come with me. And I thought, okay, well, I could get fired. I got to go back to the mansion, but this may be worth getting fired for.
Yeah.
Famously, you go out with Belushi, you end up back home 3 days from that. I thought, well, we'll see what it goes.
Yeah.
And so I parked and we went into the studio, and I remember walking down the hall and seeing the gold records on the wall and stuff. And it was kind of neat. We went back to the studio where there were a bunch of guys waiting for him and say, hey, John, how you doing? And I stood there waiting to be introduced and wondering, when are we going to start doing drugs? What's going on? But I quickly realized that his attention was on the next shiny thing. And I would just stood there like, okay. I just turned around and left. I thought, okay, he's on to something else. That was the last time I saw him. Yeah.
I remember Kathy St. George also shared, she actually opened up the door one night when him and Aykroyd had showed up at the mansion and left them in. And she's like, we'll have to sleep. And so they came in and hung out. And she said that was the last time that she saw him. And then a couple months later, he had passed. So he was definitely battling his addiction at that point, big time. And then what you just said with the background that his wife was mad at him and he was like sleeping around and stuff. Yeah, certainly that the era of the time, right?
I remember Chevy Chase came up one night. And I was a big Chevy Chase fan. It was before we knew he was an asshole, more or less. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a stuntman. So my brothers and I would practice jumping off the garage roof and slamming in the walls and hitting each other with chairs and stuff. And at the mansion, when I got comfortable at the mansion, I would amuse people by tripping and falling and doing pratfalls. And I could tumble down the complete set of front hall steps and land with the splat on the marble floor to the point where people would say, bring up their date and say, hey, Leland, do your fall for Dorothy or whatever. So I kind of got known for that. So when Chevy Chase was there, he was out in the game house shooting pool with a friend of his, and me and one of the audio video guys went out there, offered him a joint, we smoked, and then he dumped a bunch of cocaine on the table and said, I made a mess here. You guys might want to clean that up.
Wow.
So we did some blow, and then I told him that I liked his pratfalls, because he opened the Saturday Night Live show by doing a fall. And so we started showing each other falls and, comparing falls and showing each other tricks and stuff. So here I am with Chevy Chase, showing each other falls. So that was kind of a high point.
Oh my God, that's so epic because that's like one of the things that Chevy Chase is known for.
Yeah, physical
comedy.
Yeah, I worked. That Peter Pitofsky, we were in a show together. Jay Leno loved him. That was one of the things that he did was those pratfalls. And but I'm telling you, you have injuries forever. I don't care how. It's never right. I mean, it looks insane. It looks painful.
Yeah. It was fun. I didn't like it when people said, hey, Leland, do the fall, because it was much better if they didn't expect it and they didn't know you were doing it,
Exactly.
If someone is walking through the hall and they'd tumble down, they go be horrified and they'd pop up.
Yeah, that's when it's the most fun. Oh my gosh, this is horrible. I always swear I hate gossip, but I'm like, why was Chevy Chase an asshole for you?
He wasn't. I said that's before we knew he was an asshole. I mean, the general public, it's been kind of known. He wasn't an asshole.
Okay.
No, she was cool to me.
That's awesome. My God, what a cool era and decade to be around and just to see that caliber of talent and celebrity. And I'm sorry, that would have never happened. As you know, that would have never happened for any of us had we not ever been at the mansion and met all these incredible people. I definitely want to touch on Dorothy Stratton. So unbeknownst to me, and thank you for telling me the playmates that you were close with. So Heidi Sorensen wrote a book called The Breast Chronicles. And Heidi, also a fellow Vancouverite, is what they call themselves, from Vancouver, such as Kimberly Hefner, Pamela Anderson, and Dorothy Stratton. And so Heidi Sorensen had published a book called The Breast Chronicles. And in this book, I'm going to read a quick little excerpt. So for our listening audience, Dorothy Stratton, one of the most revered and I would say probably well-known playmates, and unfortunately, because she was murdered by her estranged husband at the time, Paul Schneider. And he was the one who ultimately got her into Playboy. But he was falling apart at that point. She was with Peter Bogdanovich. And so it was 1980. He published this book recently, and there's a chapter devoted to the memories of the day that Dorothy died. And it's a very important time and horrific tragedy that happened in the scope of Playboy history. In this book, it says it was a very powerful and grim remembrance that takes the reader to the unbelievably tragic night, one of horror and loss, of the day Playboy received the news of Dorothy Stratton's murder. In the book, Heidi recalls Dorothy in her innocence. She was a pure spirit in every sense, so completely naive to the harshness of the world and the cruelties of others. She was down to earth and real. Her eyes never beheld pretty jealousies. She was encapsulated in a bubble of love, truly. She had eyes full of wonder and excitement in regards to her future. And then the night that she died, Heidi was sitting in the dining room with Sandra Theodore and some of the other singing playmates, which I've never even heard of. So that's something that we have to touch on, Karina, at a later time. And a butler entered the room and a hushed voice told the playmates what had happened. In the state of disbelief, Sandra and Heidi walked the stone path to the game room to tell Hef. When the words finally came out, Hef's eyes clouded over in a fog. Hef loved Dorothy, not in a romantic way, but in the way that one soulmate might love another when they recognize their goodness. It was the end of something beautiful and the beginning of Dorothy's journey on another level. Was that you? Were you the butler that went in and told the news?
Yeah, it's interesting. Sis Rundle has a story that she took the phone call, but the way it happened was at night, a call came into the mansion and I answered. So the butlers answered the phone at night. And it was, I forget his name, but it's the private eye that Paul Snyder had hired to follow Dorothy. He called and said, I need to talk to Hef. Dorothy got shot. And I didn't know the guy and didn't know who he was. So I called bullshit. And I said, yeah, okay. And I hung up on him. And he called back just a minute or so later, said, no, honestly, you can call the LAPD if you don't believe me. Dorothy just got shot and she's dead. And I need to talk to Hef.
And you already knew that he was a weirdo. Like you had already.
Yeah.
Everybody knew.
Nobody who ever met Paul didn't come away with a bad impression of the guy. He was just snaky. But so I called out to the game house. Hef was out at the game house at the time. And I put the call through, I think, to Sis Rundle or whoever it was, social secretary that night. So I didn't see Hef's reaction or anything. But my memory of it is that all the girls, there were a bunch of girls up there. Heidi reminded me that it was a singing playmates, but they came from the game house, came into the dining room and were in tears. They were shattered and asked for champagne. Now, they were shattered because it hit so close to home, because just about every playmate had some guy, maybe not a creep like Paul, but had some boyfriend back home that they had left for Playboy that was now, some producer that was chasing them around saying, no, I'm going to make your life everything you want it to be. The phone and the PBX phone in the pantry was often festooned with post-it notes saying things like, if Joe calls for Cindy, she's not here. Or if Peter calls for Lisa, she's off the property. We were like the gatekeepers, and the Playboy Mansion was a place where you could avoid reality. So I think all these girls understood, every one of them. You look at Playmate profiles, and in turnoffs, it's a very common thing to see jealous people, because most beautiful women are exposed to jealous people. They get a boyfriend or someone likes them, and that guy thinks everyone else is going to be after their girlfriend because she's fucking beautiful. So I think that's a common thing. And I think most of those girls had the experience with some guy that was a little too clingy or a little too jealous, or, don't leave me, or, So that's partly why I think it hit them particularly hard. In addition to which, everybody loved Dorothy. She was a very sweet person. She was only 20. She was very just untrammeled by anything, I frankly, to be honest, I thought she was an airhead. She wasn't, but that was the impression she gave, just because she was so naive and sweet.
Well, I can tell you, I know it was a game changer for everyone, because I was that way when I came into Playboy. I was a baby, and I had never even heard of Dorothy Stratton. I didn't know about Star 80. And one of the things that I had a very jealous boyfriend when I came in, and I was Miss August. She was a Miss August. And I had someone say, you remind me, and it wasn't a compliment in the sense that, no, I'm telling you, obviously it was devastating. And I had someone take me aside, including him, because I wanted to use the last name of my boyfriend instead of my name, because I loved the ring of it, Karina D'Angelo. I thought, I want that. But he was very jealous, and they saw it before I did because of Dorothy. And they told me, no, you don't want to use his name. He's the one that got me into Playboy. So I remember getting a lecture and them saying, you have to be so careful. And I know you don't understand this. And I didn't. I was so naive. It might have been Mary or somebody told me, you really remind us of Dorothy. And it wasn't what I looked like. It was my person. They said, you really remind us of Dorothy. And I didn't know who she was. And I said, okay. They said, but we just want you to know you've got to be very, very careful. And you may think your boyfriend, but he was very possessive. But because of that, now looking back and hearing your story, I want to hear the rest of your story. I realized the magnitude of that and how scary and how dangerous, and jealousy is such an evil thing. Your jealousy like that, you don't think you could, someone's going to murder someone.
Became interesting because I served them champagne and they kept drinking champagne for hours into the early hours of the evening, and they all got quite drunk. And by the end of the night or the early hours, they were laughing it up because they were so drunk, and also just not in a callous way. They were just trying to forget, and they were kind of medicating themselves. But what was really interesting to me is that they asked for a Polaroid camera. They started taking pictures of each other. We didn't do selfies back then, but we had a Polaroid camera in the house. And they started taking pictures of each other, flashing each other. And I thought that just struck me as really interesting because somehow their identity was still kind of tied up in the fact that, I will show you my breasts, and that's, what gives me some value, or that's fun, or whatever it is. I thought it struck me as really as a really strange thing to do on the heels of the news they just got. I mean, they were all drunk, and they left the Polaroids there that night, and I cleaned them up, and I thought, well, this would be a good souvenir to have. Then I thought, I decided not to. I laid them all out, and I took a Polaroid of all the Polaroids. I decided in the end that wasn't cool to take them, so I put them in Sandra Theodore's box. But yeah. So that was the experience. It went from tears to drunken laughter and flashing their boobs.
Let me ask you, could you visually see the impact that it had on Hef? Because it's something that he spoke about the rest of his life.
I don't have much memory of that. He was with his friends like Mark Saganor and Harry Weems and John Dante and stuff out in the game house. And I'm sure they were huddled around a phone trying to get details all night. But I didn't really I don't remember any moment where he seemed shattered or shaken or things changed or anything really changed. It's very likely that things did change for him and he did express some emotion about it, but I wasn't privy to any of that. I never saw it that I can recall.
Your observation was interesting to me, that your initial impression was that she was a bit of an airhead, but looking back, it wasn't even that. She was just so...
she's certainly shown with the special light, and you watch her. I mean, I sometimes I used to think of maybe people were just, Monday morning quarterbacking when everyone said there was something special about her. But you watch the movie, they all laughed. She just shines in that. She has such a presence.
That she could have been a spectacular, really,
I think so.
An incredible actress. And
I think that in a way that kind of hurt Hef too, because Hef likes it when his playmates got into movies because it made him feel like he was part of Hollywood, which he really wasn't. And that's probably his one regret is he didn't get to be a Hollywood producer. He tried, and he said when he got his star on the Walk of Fame, that meant more to him than anything else, because it was Hollywood was embraced. I think he felt invited into the tent finally.
He was such a master because he understood film. He was...
Oh, yeah, it was film. These were enormously important to him, and he created a life that was movie-like.
I wanted him to invest in my first feature film, and he also understood the brand. So he understood that he had a whole brand to maintain, and he had to keep it separate because he was going to invest in a film that I was doing. And he said, Karina, you want to go? He put me in touch with someone at Hallmark because it was a very heartwarming love story. And there was bits and pieces of Playboy in it because my character was loosely based on me, my friend that wrote it, who now works at Paramount. But he told me, Karina, no, you don't want anyone. I don't want to put my name anywhere near this, because he really thought it was that worthy when he read the script, which I thought was so interesting. So he kind of understood that, even though it probably hurt, he understood that Playboy was separate from the movie industry, because he even kept the privacy of so many people that were heads of studios, even. That
Karina, that makes even so much more sense right now, just from what Leland said about, and as we know, like Hef's love affair with cinema, and that's really what the Playboy Centerfold was based on, were the starlets of that era. But we just had an interview with the USC professor that was the chair of the censorship in cinema last week, Leland, and he spoke about how important it was that at the end of each semester that they held the class, Hef would go in for a Q&A, and he never missed it over 20 years. He even gave up going to London to receive a award. Mary had called Professor Rick Jewell and told him how important it was for him to attend his Q&A sessions at this course, because he loved cinema, and he was able to then give back in that capacity with a Q&A with students. So that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was one of the three. They called him one of
The third professor. Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful for you to speak on that bit of history and
I know,
and
it's so dark. We kind of went. It's like,
yeah, but it's important. It's important to talk about. I remember watching that film when I was like 10. But I knew it was a very important story, and it impacted me when I saw it. And then when I was discovered for Playboy, I was like, oh my God, Dorothy Stratton, and I remembered that. So it's definitely as dark and horrific as it is. It's a part of Playboy history and one that needs to be spoken about, and really just purely to honor Dorothy. But then it also just goes back to the problem of domestic violence. And I think that Luann is working on a script right now that kind of surrounds that. Is the
Yeah, she
epidemic
wrote a
of
script about it. Yeah.
violence, and actually looking at that whole situation and what happened to Dorothy through that lens, that it was domestic violence at the end of the day. She was murdered by her husband. She was called over. He set it up. Murder suicide is what it was. So yeah. So
yeah,
thank you.
it's something. It's, you want people to continue to be aware, because we all age and get older, and then there's a whole new young flock of girls that are unsuspecting. But we're so aware now of all of these things. You can you can take classes on YouTube on what these predators are and psychopathic narcissists, and
Guys are dicks.
what. Yeah, they're real buttholes.
But especially Leland, that was a good point that you brought up, because it's something that each and every one of us has had to contend with. And that is when you become a playmate. I had a high school boyfriend at the time, and it was in a matter of a year, no longer. I mean, think about it from the male's perspective of like, oh, I love this woman. And I'm not speaking to Dorothy Stratton's husband, because he was a piece of shit, obviously. But it's a big thing for a man to contend with, that, this is the woman I love. There's certainly playmates that went in that were married at the time that would end up getting divorced. Your whole life is.
There's healthy, everybody, we're human, but it's, out of control when someone wants.
Yeah. So.
Had a difficult time when women would walk away from him. Barbie Benton broke his heart. I think he was unhappy that Sandra eventually moved out. He was unhappy that Shannon moved out. I think he was of the mind, like, you're going to walk away from me? I'm Hugh Hefner.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
But, male egos are just fragile that way. I think, the biggest, toughest guys still crumble to pieces when a girl breaks their heart, What is it with you chicks?
Yeah.
You chicks. Playmates.
Are you married?
I've managed to avoid that ensnarement below these many years.
Are you dating? I want to know all of it. All of it.
I was dating Luann Fernald up until recently.
Yeah, I do remember you saying that.
I knew Luann briefly at the mansion. She came through there very briefly. She had a boyfriend at the time, and she says that she immediately recognized the sort of predatory atmosphere of the place, so just didn't really dive into it. So I remember her as being kind of stuck up and aloof. Over the last many years, they've had Playboy Mansion reunion parties at Holmby Park, just down the hill from the mansion.
Yeah, I've gone the last couple of years, yeah.
So I met Luann there, and we started dating.
That's right. Oh, that's so cool.
That's really neat. It is a camaraderie that, it just is.
She's a very sweet person and still quite beautiful.
Yeah, definitely.
So I've always spent most of my life being a struggling writer, or sometimes a successful writer. And that always sort of took precedence. I didn't want to drag a girl along on my struggles, So I've had some long relationships. I've been engaged a few times. But at the end of the day, I'm just kind of I think my chief value is freedom. And I'm a kind of a loner. And women get tired of that. Like my attitude has always been, you love me? Okay, good. I'll see you later. And that.
Hey, at least you know when you're honest about it, Leland. There's something to be said for that. So tell us the name of your Facebook page so we can obviously share that with our audience. It's a great page because just the history and the photographs and everything you have on there, I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah, Facebook has gotten to be real active. Like they keep flagging stuff and taking stuff down. There's no nudity on it.
No. Anything about Playboy, they do that.
Yeah, I see other pages that have far more salacious material, but I keep getting flagged and threatened. It's funny because Playboy will send me a notice say your page is in jeopardy. And if you continue posting stuff like this, you're in danger of losing your page. And the same day, I'll get a notice from Facebook saying, hey, congratulations, you got 300 views. Here's how to post. It's all bots, but it's a bit irritating. Anyway, the page is Playboy Mansion West 1980s.
Playboy Mansion West. So to our audience, definitely go follow that page, and it's a deep dive just into the whole history of Playboy.
I post a lot of pictures of Playmates from that era, but also every picture I can find of the mansion from that era, and contemporary pictures that I find as they're renovating the mansion. I've combed the web for images of the construction in progress, and so there's thousands of posts on there. If anyone's interested, they can just go on that page and just do an archive search, and there's tons of what I think pretty interesting stuff. Playmates are on there too. I mean, they will like posts or comment on it. So I know a lot of Playmates who visit the page regularly. So I'm keeping the torch alive.
I know you're a script writer, but
I'll write a book. Well, I have that that's an ongoing project of mine too. So watch this space.
Nice. I love it. So we like to end the show always with 2 questions, and we love to hear what people say. So the first question is 3 words that define Hugh Hefner to you.
Intelligent, generous, horny.
That's great. Horny. You were the horn dog.
I can just interject. I'll give you my viewpoint on that. I think his legacy has been tarnished in large part because of himself. The Me Too movement came along, and I don't know if I don't subscribe to the fact that Hef was a predator, certainly. But, he liked his women, and he liked to have sex with a lot of women. For whatever weird reason, it became a real kind of sickness with. I mean, you think about people like Paul McCartney or John Lennon. They could have had any woman in the world, and probably did for a couple of years, but they both settled down and had legendary romances, Yoko Ono and Linda. And many people, George Clooney, you name anyone who rock stars have slept through 100 women or 1,000 women, they eventually get that out of their system. They settle down and fall in love with someone. Hef never did. And he got worse and worse about it, especially in reaction to Crystal. And then who was the first one? Kim Conrad? He got married and settled down.
Yeah,
and then when he got out of those marriages, he bounced back and he became a parody of himself with 7 bleach blonde girlfriends and out all the time. And I think that went a long way in sort of tarnishing his relationship. And people don't look at him so much as a champion of female rights or civil rights in general. They see him as this clown in pajamas that always had a bunch of beautiful women around him, even when he was 90 years old.
That's a really good point. That it was like to his own detriment.
Yeah. He could have
because of his affinity for multiple women, then that ultimately ended up hurting him at the day. And of course, you're going to look at him and be like, oh, yeah, he was this person because of that. When in fact, he just had a healthy sexual appetite, and he chose to live his life on his terms, like it or not.
It's actually a whole case study. I mean,
no question.
And what sex addiction is. And I really do think you can destroy yourself. I think he was such an incredible human being and had enough character, which made him so unique, because most men, like you said, Leland, are predators, and he wasn't. He was actually a gentleman. He actually appreciated and celebrated women. He also empowered women. So it was an odd dichotomy that was very rare, because everyone that knew him, I never felt like he was a creep. Never once.
No, I never thought it was a creep either.
And that's a rare character, but Echo sometimes laughs at me because I'll make biblical analogies, but I love flawed humans. I mean, as an actress, that's what you love anyway. And some of the most incredible humans and stories are in the Bible. And David had a harem. Talking about David, and I'm making a comparison with Hef. There were a lot of similarities to him and David, who had multiple lovers, multiple women, and Solomon, who it was his demise. But I'm saying this because they weren't bad men. And even David, with all of his flaws, was a man after the Lord's own heart. Now, whether or not Hef ever, believed in Jesus or whatever, that's between him and God. But it's interesting to look at how, it could have been an unhappiness that, is a case study in sex addiction and in, too much of a good thing and not having that. I wonder, it's one of the questions I would love to have asked him before he died is, I think that he was such a romantic, and maybe he would have thought that monogamy would have suited him better, because then he had people on the inner circle at the end of his life that you wonder, did you trap yourself? Because like you said, his legacy has been, it shouldn't have been. And I hope that it can be rekindled, but for the man that he was, and the reason I compare him to David is because he did so much good. You know what I mean by that? Like,
Sure.
and I hate that they lump him into, like you said, the hashtag Me Too. And when he wasn't a rapist, he wasn't a pedophile.
Okay, Echo. So what's your second question?
The second question is, had you had the opportunity to say anything to have for in memoriam, what would you say?
I would say, hey, my name is Leland.
Fucking perfect, Leland. We haven't had that response either. Hey, my name is Leland. And actually, what's very funny, Leland, all the butlers say that. They're like, I don't think he ever knew my name. And I'm like, hard to believe because you were there for 30 years. Like, surely he knew your name.
It's Leland. Learn it, use it.
And half, my God,
That's
I
your
love
pipe.
it.
That's your pipe.
You
Your
stole
pipe.
his pipe. We're not getting your name.
That is fabulous. Well, what a fun interview, Leland. I'm so happy we finally got to speak with you. Thank you so, so much. Thank you so very much to our audience for tuning in. Leland, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. And there he goes with his pipe. So for y'all listening on audio, you need to come watch the actual video because Leland threw up some really good memorabilia pieces that you definitely want to take a peek at. All right. Well, with that said, we'll see you guys next week.